Hello and welcome to Newchip Online Demo Week. Newchip is a global industry agnostic accelerator serving companies at the pre-seed, seed, and Series A stage. Today, we are having an expert panel about the challenge facing us in tackling global climate change and the solutions that are coming from our startups and our investor network in terms of circular economy and recycling. We're joined today by Jonathan Strimling. He is the founder and CEO of CleanFiber. And John, let's start with who you are. Could you please give a brief introduction and bio?
Sure. My name is John Strimling. I'm the CEO of CleanFiber, and I have a background as a serial entrepreneur with a particular focus in clean tech. So my background is in manufacturing operations originally before I became an entrepreneur leading firms. Since I've been leading firms, I launched a business called woodpellets.com, which was a renewable heating fuels provider. And then I launched actually something outside of clean tech. I launched a marketing automation company to the NASDAQ. And now I'm back in clean tech working on CleanFiber, which makes high performance building insulation from recycled cardboard boxes. So I guess in terms of my own background as a bit of a technologist and manufacturing ops guy, I like cost effective solutions that can enter an existing market and gain traction pretty quickly and have an impact on the environment fairly rapidly, and that's where I'd focused my efforts.
Talking about CleanFiber, what's the specific challenge with current insulation methods, and how is CleanFiber addressing this differently?
Yeah, so CleanFiber makes cellulose insulation. I'm going to talk about the challenges in the market in two different zones. One is the decision of the type of insulation you might pick, and then the other is the decision of the brand of the insulation you might pick. So a lot of people are familiar with foam and fiberglass, but not as many people are familiar with cellulose, although cellulose is in millions of homes all over the country, and it's the number 3 solution, and it's prevalent. There's thousands of installers installing cellulose insulation instead of fiberglass or instead of foam. And the reason that cellulose wins against fiberglass is it's a better insulator. It does a better job of stopping airflow and heat flow particularly than a fiberglass bat, which you may see in homes. It's also very cost effective. It's far more cost effective than foam. And it often can be even more cost effective than fiberglass. So as codes have tightened, cellulose has become relatively more competitive compared to fiberglass. And that has opened up new markets for cellulose. So it's already about coming up on a $600 million market in North America, coming up on $1 billion globally. And that is because it is a better insulator than fiberglass, and it's much more cost effective. The other thing is from a carbon perspective, it takes a tremendous amount of carbon to build a building. It consumes a huge amount of energy, and there's a lot of energy that goes into making fiberglass or foam, and the impact on the environment of using those materials is negative in terms of the carbon emissions. Cellulose, in contrast, allows you to actually store carbon in buildings. And so we're averting carbon emissions by putting cellulose into buildings. There's a lot of trends that are favoring the growth of cellulose insulation. One of them is tightening building codes. Another is concerns about carbon emissions. The third is actually concerns about indoor air quality. So it's actually safer for the inhabitants to have cellulose in the walls than fiberglass or foam. Fiberglass is a known respiratory irritant. Foam has volatile organic compounds in it, which are given out for some time after it's installed. It can pose a health hazard to inhabitants. So for all these reasons, cellulose has been growing. However, within the cellulose industry, there are 3 problems. So our product within the cellulose industry has 3 advantages over incumbent technologies. Our competitors shred newspaper, they add a dry powder fire retardant, and they bag out a finished product that looks like that bag behind me, except it has a different brand on it. CleanFiber has a patented liquid process that allows us to make a superior product at a lower manufacturing cost than our competition. And we're able to make it from recycled corrugated cardboard or newsprint or other low-cost raw materials. The reason this is important is the newspaper's going away. So, we're conducting this event virtually. Everything's going virtual. Everything's going electronic, and the newspaper is dying very, very fast. So today we've got growing demand in the market and declining supply because our competition can't get raw materials. CleanFiber rides into that huge emerging market gap with a product that actually performs better, and we can make it a lower cost from a nearly inexhaustible supply. Because I always tell people, it used to be open your door and you saw a newspaper. Today you probably see a cardboard box. So we're riding that wave too. So that's a little bit about us and how we fit in.
Well, I'm certainly happy that I'll have something to do with my Amazon boxes that pile up at my door. You mentioned, the difference between, the domestic market and the global overseas market, as well as, the developing market with new construction. And another thing you kind of touched on is this recyclability aspect within the global supply chain. Can you walk us through what, this looks like from a global perspective, how this is impacting climate change as a global problem, whether that be with changes in building codes, maybe in Europe in terms of architectural or LEED standards, or in terms of, supply chain, how this is impacting from production to use to end of life?
Sure. So like any other building material, building materials are used differently all over the world. So the type of construction in warm climates can be different than cool climates, and moist climates can be different than dry climates. But what we do see is that some countries are further ahead in the curve of the progression towards a lower carbon environment. So Europe really has pioneered green building standards, and whereas in the U.S., cellulose is about 6% of the market today. If you go to Finland, cellulose is more than 50% of the homes. They're some of the tightest building codes in the world. And so we know that as the world continues to adopt the Paris Agreement and other agreements that are designed to reduce the carbon emissions we're imparting on the world and the globe, we know we're sort of on the right side of the curve, and our segment will continue to grow in the market. And we see what's a $1 billion market now grown to easily $4 billion by the end of the decade, just on current trajectories and what's happening. Of course, we're not the right solution for everything. Insulation is a vast market. It's probably $100 billion globally by the end of this decade. And we're not the right solution for every problem. There are types of construction that cellulose isn't suitable for. There's in some cases, there's insulation that's exposed to the weather, and we're not suitable for that. But with that said, I think we're going to see a variety of solutions, and I think those that are lower in carbon and better for the environment are going to grow preferentially, and the markets are going to reward those.
So it's really interesting that you mentioned the regulatory incentives right now to make this switch, because one thing that a lot of investors, and I'm sure Wanda will attest to, will ask is, well, why do we need these solutions now? What's unique about this moment in the market? Why hasn't someone done this before, in terms of newspaper recycling? And I think you mentioned two key points that you might want to elaborate on. One is your background in material science and the patented technology that comes with CleanFiber. And second, are those new building codes, is this growing global consciousness around having a sustainable and circular economy? So what's the why now for CleanFiber?
So yeah, this is I guess the company's time has come. So the why now, for cellulose as an industry, the why now is because people are actually starting to make buying decisions on the basis of carbon. Historically, the product has grown. It's been grown for 20 years in terms of volumes, but it's grown slowly because carbon hasn't been a major factor in people's purchase decisions historically. But we're now seeing that the code officials are starting to pay more attention to carbon issues. And we're also seeing that even consumers are starting to pay more attention to carbon issues and asked to live in green buildings, both from an indoor air quality standpoint and from a carbon perspective. For our business, the entire market is in shortage because there's not enough newspaper. The newspaper is dying. So, if there was ever a time to switch from newsprint to corrugated, this would be it. And then we're not the first people to try to make this product out of corrugated. Big companies have tried and failed. We're working with a multi-billion-dollar paper company that tried for years, gave up, and partnered with us. The biggest player in the industry tried for over a decade to execute what we've pulled off, which is using a liquid fire retardant to make this product. And we've got over a dozen patents, between issued and pending that protect the technology we've developed, and we're innovating every day and have quite a few trade secrets inside of our plant, which we also protect vigorously. So IP is a big part of this. We just feel fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, I guess is one way to put it. It's kind of a perfect storm opportunity for our business. And we think it's actually also for the globe. If you look at the large scale climate simulation models, such as En-ROADS, which was put out by the System Dynamics group at MIT, when they model through how you actually impact carbon emissions in the globe, you don't get there by inventing new technology that's going to generate electricity, because it takes too long to invent and roll out. You get there by immediately insulating every building you can with carbon negative insulation. That's how you get there fast. And so we think the issue is here, the issue is now in terms of having a carbon impact, and we have a here and now solution we can roll out fast. So I think that's also part of the answer.
Well, as an MIT alum yourself, I'm sure you are up to date on top of the latest climate models. And I think you've answered really well exactly how your business is mitigating climate change and driving the circular economy, in terms of we don't need a fusion breakthrough tomorrow or 10% cheaper solar panels. If we're just replacing existing insulation and existing materials with products like CleanFiber, then that's how we're going to make a difference in the economy going forward.
I mean, just to clarify, I think we need it all. We need the innovation. Yeah. We need a 10% improvement in solar cells, and then another 10%. We need to keep marching on all of these if we're going to be successful. But there's that expression of low-hanging fruit, and insulation is one of those opportunities we can go after as a nation or as a globe very rapidly to make things happen. And in our case, our product actually reduces carbon emission 3 different ways. We insulate buildings better, so there's less fossil fuel consumed in heating or cooling those buildings. Secondly, we actually reduce the energy required to build buildings. So it takes less energy to put cellulose into a building than it would take to produce fiberglass or to produce foam. And we don't have the VOC emissions associated with foam. And then finally, we are actually taking fiber in many cases which could not be recycled. We're able to use fibers that cannot otherwise be recycled, and we're storing them and sequestering them in walls instead of allowing them to decay in fields. And that results in both a reduction in carbon emissions and methane emissions. So it's really a triple whammy. We're reducing emissions from disposal, we're storing carbon in buildings, we're reducing the energy in buildings, and then we're also reducing the energy used by buildings. And we're going to go after all this and solar and electric cars and the whole 9 yards to get where we need to go.
Well, it's amazing to hear how both the innovation and the business operations from CleanFiber are driving that, not only in terms of the material science, the market trends, but even the efficiency improvements in terms of construction. Thank you so much for your time, John. We'd like now to shift to Wanda to give us a perspective from the investor side of the table and what the investor in the global climate change, the clean energy, the circular economy is thinking when these kind of companies and challenges come across their desk. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Wanda Reindorf, Managing Director at Clean Energy Ventures Group. Wanda, thank you for being with us today. Could you please start with a brief self-introduction and bio?
Sure. I'm a partner at the Clean Energy Venture Group, and we've been around for about 15 years, and the mission is to invest and support early stage companies that have potential to mitigate climate change with, of course, a very positive financial return, because they both have to go hand in hand. Obviously, companies' products need to have widespread adoption if they're going to have an impact on climate change. So that we look at both. And I was interested in that you used the term circular economy for one of the subjects of this panel, because that's one of the things that we look at. And just to define for people who may not be familiar with the term, we define it as that it employs reuse and recycling to create a closed loop system, minimizing putting in new inputs and really reducing waste, and in that sense also carbon emissions. So waste materials and energy become input for other processes. And I think John articulated very well how CleanFiber really fits one of those, fits that criteria, because they utilize the waste from the cardboard and use that as an input into embedding carbon into the material that then goes into insulating the house. So as he mentioned, it takes it out of the landfill, keeps the carbon from being produced there, embeds the carbon in the walls, and then also saves fossil fuel usage because it's a high performance insulation and reduces the use of fossil fuels. So we sort of get a triple whammy on that one, and so it really fits our criteria.
Well, you've done an excellent job in providing that background to the circular economy, which I should have done. But I want to understand a little more about what the specific challenges, sectors, theses, technologies you're seeing, as a partner at, Clean Energy Venture Group, that you think are really going to drive not only the financial returns, but the ecological returns in the next 10 years. What are the specific, challenges, trends, technologies that you see making the biggest impact?
Well, sure. I do think that there's just a lot more awareness of the E and ESG, the environmental impact. People really can't close their eyes to it. I mean, you're seeing fires, building collapse, floods, extreme heat. You just can't ignore it. So everyone from the business sector to the investment community to consumers to regulators and government, everyone is having a part in driving this forward. And whether it's reporting requirements for corporations on their environmental initiatives, stakeholder groups, RPS, renewable portfolio standards that are done often in the US on the state level, the electrification of the grid, pressure from employees to really green up companies' products and consumers as well. So there's sort of a multi-pronged impact going on right now, and the multi-impact drivers of the impetus to look at companies that can reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about both the cultural and regulatory changes that are driving this. I think, just recently, Europe announced border adjustments for carbon and carbon manufacturing, which is something that has been talked about for a long time. So it's definitely a macro secular trend that we're only going to see increase. But everyone operates within their own vertical, their own local context. John's working in insulation. You yourself working at the Clean Energy Venture Group. Can you give us a little bit about that geographic context on a global problem? Where do you invest? Where are you based? And what kind of global markets do you look at within your specific context?
Yeah, well, we particularly have a mandate to work with companies in the U.S. We're based out of Boston and New York. However, that being said, a lot of our companies' products have international markets. We'd like them to be able to adapt first in the U.S. And then expand. You can't concentrate on multiple markets especially in the U.S., which is challenging for a lot of renewable technology and energy efficiency technology companies, because the standards, regulations, and codes differ state by state. That's one disadvantage the U.S. has versus Europe, where there's a lot more commonality, both within the entire country as well as across the is across all of Europe. So that can be challenging because in certain of our technologies, they have to work utility by utility, state regulatory commission by commission. So that can be a challenge as well.
So that door to door in the field, the regulations in California aren't going to be the same as they are in Tennessee.
That's for sure. That being said, I mean, there's very large markets in any of these areas, and we're starting to see energy efficiency. Now, John had alluded to energy efficiency is that we can't get there just with renewable energy or, any kind of technological breakthrough. And energy efficiency has been known for decades that that's really the low-hanging fruit, that 40% of emissions are in buildings. 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are in buildings, but it never really got the attention that it did for investors because it didn't have that kind of a grab of new technology. So something like CleanFiber is doing, which does have technology in it, but it isn't a new a more efficient solar cell, et cetera. People are starting to pay more attention to that and actually measuring what is happening in buildings, because that has to be a big part of the solution, whether it's looking at balancing systems, using the production of energy more efficiently, and then you'll hear embedded carbon more and more in terms of building materials, what goes into the structure of the building, keeping carbon embedded in the footprint of the building. And that's starting to get a lot of traction.
Well, I think you've touched on a really interesting point. If you look at some of the companies that were exciting a decade ago, like your Teslas, your Bloom Energies, your Solyndras, some of the companies that drove the last clean tech boom and bust 10 years ago, they're maybe a little more exciting and sexy to the consumer than something that actually drives impact, like a CleanFiber. So having gone through that boom and bust cycle back in the 2010s, 2011, 2012 timeframe, what's different about this market now? What's unique? What are investors looking for? And how has that changed given, those portfolios that went through rockier times a decade earlier?
Mm-hmm. Well, I could talk a lot about what was problematic about some of those investments. Unfortunately, it was a lot of technology investors who came in who didn't really understand clean tech. They were used to sort of much faster adoption cycles and much lower customer acquisition costs. And so even though whether maybe the technology worked, it was just very hard to scale. And some of them were maybe more appropriate for project finance, not venture investing. Right now, we're seeing things being adopted quicker, and there's a real push. And you're seeing not just a company like Amazon and the Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Apple's all have very aggressive carbon reduction goals on their own, but they're virtually every company is starting to adopt carbon reduction goals. So it's a very different environment, and they're looking for their own footprint in the products that they use and their entire supply chain to be reducing greenhouse gases. And their customers are demanding it. Their shareholders are demanding it. The regulatory agencies are demanding it. The insurance and bankers are starting to look at this as well, because you just take a look at what kind of catastrophic losses there are now from climate-driven events. And we haven't even started to see the beginning of it between fires, flooding, et cetera. Real estate is particularly vulnerable. And so having solutions for real estate is going to be really a large segment of the solution.
I think what you mentioned there is very interesting, distinguishing between the kind of risk capital that venture provides and the more traditional asset income-driven stream financing that you get with an asset class like project finance. How specifically, as a venture investor, someone in this highly lauded asset class, do you see VCs helping to mitigate climate change and drive the circular economy, both from an investment perspective by investing at the right point in the right type of companies, and also, we should mention, from a governance perspective? You are on the board, I believe, of CleanFiber, and so how are VCs in board roles influencing, these kind of ESG considerations, both at clean tech companies and non-clean tech companies?
Oh, okay. Well, let me just correct. I'm not on the board of CleanFiber, but I've been an advisor, and I'm also an investor through Clean Energy Ventures. So ESG it's not only just for venture capital. It's really permeating from Fortune 500 up and down the chain. So people are making investments, not making investments even on what types of stocks to buy. I mean, the ESG segment has just, there's literally trillions of dollars in ESG portfolios. It's just multiplying and multiplying. And it probably will not be just a voluntary reporting requirement to have to report on your environmental footprint. It's becoming more and more required for investors to be able to see that and have it quantifiable. The issue is that it's not been standardized yet. There's a variety of different reporting protocols, and there's a number of organizations that are working to try to standardize that as well.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see once we have a gap, so to speak, for ESG reporting, and then how those metrics will allow us to compare across industries. But that is a very detailed, very interesting answer from the other side of the table, from the investor's perspective, as well as the entrepreneurs. Okay, and now we're going to hand it over to Nischay, founder, CEO of Ace Recycling, based in Singapore, to get a global perspective on this issue. Nischay, could you start with the who? Who are you? Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much, Stephen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ace Green Recycling. We are a recycling technology company, and we are working primarily in the battery material space right now. Our current focus is to set up recycling facilities across the world for lead-acid battery recycling, whereby we use our own technology to set up these units. These are emission-free facilities, unlike the usual facilities you have globally, because it's quite a polluting industry. At the same time, we are also working on lithium-ion batteries and a few other metal-related recycling projects, which will develop over the next couple of years. So yeah, that in a nutshell is us.
So what is the specific challenge that Ace Recycling is addressing here? Because lead-acid batteries have been around for, number of years. Lithium-ion are a little newer. There are a lot of recycling companies out there. What specifically does Ace do different to address this problem we have with the circular economy, sustainability, and climate change?
Sure. So recycling industry in general has problems at multiple levels, Stefan. You name it. You have supply chain issues. You even have a lot of governance issues, for example, more so in developing or emerging markets, where 60-70% of the market in most recycling activities is unorganized. So you also have these forms of informal activities. You also have issues around technology, because in certain cases, technology to process not just batteries, but a lot of other recyclable metals or materials exists, but then the access to technology to the right players. Also, the financial ability of these players to access these technology. There are problems at so many levels. Risk management is a huge issue. A lot of these players are small family businesses who don't even have exposure to the right practices. So there are issues at multiple levels. So what are we doing? We as a company are probably one of the very few companies in the world who are a unique blend of both a technology company and having supply chain expertise on the ground. So even our core team members, we come with 15, 20 years of supply chain experience on a global level. So we kind of understand the intricacies of the whole supply chain. Plus, we already have the technology in-house to solve the problem on a technical level. So at the same time, while we set up our own facilities, and that's why, unlike many other technology companies who focus on licensing, we are looking forward to setting up our own facilities, because we know just licensing out the technology won't solve these problems. We really have to run the show and manage risks at multiple levels, and also formalize the sector, which is very informal in nature right now.
That's interesting. You mentioned your and your team's global supply chain experience, as well as the fact that this is largely an informal sector run by family businesses. That kind of leads us into the where of how this is happening in the circular economy and sustainability. A lot of Westerners, they throw out their trash, they sort their recycling, and then poof, it's out of their head. They have no perspective on what happens next. So what's the global perspective on this problem with battery manufacturing and recycling? And what's the difference between the kind of US and Asian markets?
Sure. So US market or even the European market, these markets are very well organized, actually. The supply chains are very well defined. They also have state-of-the-art recycling facilities. But even that state-of-the-art is quite old in terms of technology, because there's not been really any development of technology, only incremental developments, which are just small improvements. They still emit a lot of emissions in the air. They still dump a lot of toxic slags to the landfill, but nothing compared to what's happening in Asia or Africa or the Middle East, where these standards are really pathetic. You can't even stand in one of these facilities in the emerging markets. It's even the best of facilities. It's very difficult. So if you just compare these two markets, the challenges are different. While the Asian markets have challenges, again, repeating myself, but then at multiple levels. One is definitely supply chain and the informal part, but also the cost economics become a big challenge in the Asian or Middle Eastern or African markets, because not everybody can afford expensive technology as well, right? So it's very important to make sure that your technology solution which you are proposing to the market is very, very competitive. And that's something we've done really well, because the whole technology was developed keeping this sector in mind in the developing economies, because we know if something can work in such a competitive market in developing markets, it definitely can easily work in the developed markets like US and Europe, unlike the other way around, right? So that being said, while we look at the US markets and Europe markets, and that's something we are definitely planning to enter very soon, the idea is there to set up large facilities, whether in joint venture with some existing players or ourselves. But there we believe it's going to be easier relatively to set up these facilities. Whereas in emerging markets, we are going through the joint venture route, where we're working with local players, enabling them with both capital and technology and our supply chain expertise to help them scale up. So there are different modes of approaching the two sets of markets depending on the local issues.
Well, and another thing that should be mentioned is capital market access too, for developing these kind of businesses in Southeast Asia, Middle East, North Africa, and that's where we encourage all the investors right now watching to fill out the Cognito form for interest to meet Nischay and the other panelists presenting here and learn how to smartly deploy capital in these kind of companies which are addressing these global challenges. And so now we're going to dive a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, the how. What's kind of, the specific technical logic and process advantage that Ace Recycling has here? What's kind of the secret sauce? And how is this going to mitigate climate change, global climate change that we're seeing, and drive the circular economy?
Sure. So if you look at battery recycling, and I'm specifically talking about lead acid battery right now, lead as a metal itself is a 13-14 million ton market globally right now, which is about $26 to $28 billion market. It's a huge market, and it's still growing for the next 20-25 years. Now, when you talk about batteries, majority of use of lead is in batteries. Lead, we all know, is quite a toxic metal. So handling of lead becomes very, very critical because of the toxicity of the metal. Traditionally, the way, whether you talk about emerging markets or developed markets, the traditional way has been smelting, which is nothing but heating up the metal or the broken batteries in a pot or a furnace at 1,000 or 1,500 degrees temperature with a lot of chemicals which are quite toxic in nature. So you can.
So I assume you get a lot of lead fumes. Yeah, that's very
you get a lot of lead fumes. You get a lot of smoke because there's a lot of fossil fuel which is used. So as per statistics, depending on where you are in part of the world, you are emitting between 1 to 2.5 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per ton of metal produced. That's the statistic which is published. Now, for our process, we have zero emissions. So we are a room temperature process. It's a proprietary process whereby the only chemicals we use are very, very simple chemicals which are freely available in the market, plus our proprietary chemicals, which are organic food grade chemicals. So you're not really using toxic chemicals for that. So that's one. The other part is in our process, the generation of, because our recoveries are much higher, which means the amount of metal we can recover is much higher, and a few other things which I can't really mention here. The amount of solid waste which is generated in the end is about 70% less compared to the traditional players. So not just it helps you from an impact perspective, because you're not really sending much to the landfill, you're not really emitting anything to the air, but at the same time, also from a cost perspective, because the cost of compliance of handling emissions and landfills is quite high for existing players, at least in the formal part of the sector. So we don't have those costs as much. Therefore, we become much more competitive. The other part is we were very focused from the very beginning. We are not willing to let hazardous waste transport from one part of the world to the other. So therefore, from the very beginning, we worked on modularity of technology. So instead of bringing waste to Asia or to other countries, our belief is we have to bring the technology to the parts which are generating waste. So we can very easily set up a very small plant or a very large plant, depending on the batteries available. And the same philosophy we are using in our lithium-ion project as well. So we will be coming up with a lithium-ion recycling project most likely next year. We're already working on it. Our R&D team is working on it. And we are again basing it on hydrometallurgical processes, which are not as pollutive as compared to the other existing processes. So the same philosophy we are replicating in other battery types we are focusing on in the next couple of years.
So this is driving impact and return, not only through improved throughput of the recycling process, we're recycling more materials, but the process itself emits less CO2, less toxic waste.
It emits zero CO2. Actually.
Zero CO2, zero. Has a higher yield and is more cost effective. So this is a multi-pronged value prop, both financially, but also in terms of global impact.
Yeah. Let me for just take your time, but let me tell you a couple of statistics. So, and a few news reports which can be easily found. So one of the leading newspapers in US published a report last year where they said 1 in 3 kids in the world on average are affected by lead poisoning, which is a very disturbing statistic. So how does it happen? It happens because of the fumes which are up in the air. It happens because the seepage which happens through the landfilling, which we are doing, right, as an industry. Plus also, you talk about a lot of illegal dumping of these slags, which happens in many developing markets. So everything put together, the environment around these plants as well, the traditional ones, is not very secure for people. I've heard reports, or I've even read reports, you can easily Google and find some, where there's a village in one of the Asian countries where 100 children around that factory were found with high levels of lead in the blood. Same thing happens with workers in these facilities, right? Our process is also a very automated process, and we can make it as automated as possible so that you really need to just press buttons and not be coming very close to the toxic metals. The point is, since the world is moving towards electrification, the metal consumption is increasing more and more. So you can't really stop metal consumption. What you need to find out ways for doing is you need to find out ways of reclaiming this metal, and at the same time doing it in a way which is very environmentally friendly. Otherwise, we've already lost the battle. We can't depend on mining, for God's sake. It's a very unhealthy practice in itself. I'm a mining engineer by qualification, by the way, so I know.
Oh, wow. No, that speaks more to the experience of the team, but I think that's a really great deep dive and peeling back, the mask of the dirty business that happens to be recycling often. And if any investors are interested in connecting further with Nischay and learning more about his projects, please fill out the investor interest form below. Nischay, I want to thank you for your time today and for wrapping up our panel.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We'd now like to turn our attention to another entrepreneur and technical operator Dr. Adireddy from Advano. Are you here with us, Dr. Adireddy?
Yes, I am here. I am. For some reason, Zoom switches my camera between computers, and then so my apologies if my camera is turning off and turning on in the middle. With the Teams, it's working. Anyway, let me thank you first for inviting me to speak. With you all. We're a silicon anode materials company located in New Orleans, Louisiana, United States. We're trying to accelerate the renewable revolution to decarbonize the entire planet by making energy storage much more efficient and widely adopted. We want to see ourselves being the trusted partner, working with every wherever in the value chain we could fit in. We want to do our best to quickly make the technology being adopted at terawatt hour scale. So that's the goal of the company. Just to quickly introduce myself, I have a PhD in nanomaterials design and fabrication from University of New Orleans, and I have an MBA from Tulane University. With the support of my team members during my journey over the last 13 years, I was fortunate enough to make some contributions to materials development that resulted in 11 issued US patents and 10 more in the pipeline, 40 more that are peer-reviewed publications. Began my journey with LFP, later worked with UC Berkeley for about a year and a half to solve some of the energy materials problems for capacitors applications, then worked on intercalation materials that store hydrogen, lithium, sodium. Since 2014, I'm working on silicon-based materials. And in 2017, I left Tulane, got into Y Combinator, located in Mountain View. It's a business incubator. Was part of summer 2017 batch. Then we raised $6 million. That started a 5-member team. So that's about me and the company in a nutshell.
Well, that's a fantastic background introduction. Both your academic, scientific, and business background. Let's jump in a little bit to what the specific challenge your startup is addressing. Why is battery technology important in tackling global climate change? We focus a lot on, carbon-free generation technologies like solar, like wind, and some of these other technologies like John's in the insulation and construction market, and batteries sometimes get overlooked. So what is it that batteries address in terms of tackling global climate change?
Well, first of all, a few of the points that Jonathan and Wanda mentioned, right? Like efficiency is very important. Before you go to storage and generation, you need to know where the leaks are. You gotta try to stop the leaks, and at least there should be companies doing that. Batteries, what they do is they need to pace up with the generation technology, right? You want them to grow at the same rate, and the ecosystem should allow the investments and everything, like all three areas, right? Generation, storage, efficiency aspect, they should come together. And then all of them are growing at the same pace, not one at the, that's what very important. That's the first thing. And batteries, definitely, there should be many different battery technologies. And we see that one company tries to find something wrong with other material company, or, all that should go, because all of these are needed. And then either you're addressing the grid storage, or you're addressing transportation, or you're addressing transportation over sea. So the ecosystem should have a lot more respect in terms of sharing the technology and then growing together. But if batteries, especially where we want to come in and become the trusted partner and work other players is bringing a high capacity anode material to the market. And based on our team's experience, we think that we understand high capacity materials. We can solve the problem, and then we can help. Our technologies will work with both liquid and solid, and we have a lot more success in the solid side than liquid side. But we want to solve both ends and bring a product, a fantastic material to the product market, where it can solve problems across the globe. Means we're building a company. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned solving problems across the globe. Specifically, climate change is a global problem. And you also mentioned where in the grid and the energy supply chain different types of battery technologies might fit in. So if I have a lightweight drone application, I might be using a lithium polymer battery. If I have my cell phone, I might have a lithium ion battery. If I have grid scale storage, I might be using lead acid, because weight doesn't really matter in those applications. Also, in terms of supply chain for lithium ion, it's very heavily dependent on rare earth mining and cobalt coming from, say, copper mines in the Dominican Republic. You're coming in here with this silicon anode technology. Where's this going to fit in the grid battery energy supply chain? Is this going to be for off-grid applications, for consumer electronics, for grid-level storage? And then how does that supply chain look different for this nanofabricated silicon versus like a traditional lead acid or lithium ion?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question, and it's very loaded. Hopefully my experience allows me to address all the points. So the thing is, we are currently trying to replace graphite slowly. So wherever graphite is a state-of-the-art anode material, we're trying to replace graphite slowly, and within the 5 years, we want to completely replace graphite with our materials. So, I mean, if you take the specific capacity in terms of graphite, you could have a 375 milliamp hour per gram, and we'll slowly improve it like to 500, 550, 600, and it varies from country to country and company to company. And some people don't want to fool with any new technology. They want to just like, hey, can you make this? We're not interested in really high energy density, but can you make it in the massive volume? So we are keeping everyone in the mind and trying to serve. But serving, it comes with a lot. Like we're super transparent in terms of what we do, and if they like it, they take it, and then they don't see anything different from the numbers what we give. So that's how we're building the company. So wherever the graphite is currently being used, that's where our solution would be most meaningful.
So this is a horizontal battery technology more so than a vertical one, because rather than, say, having an aluminum, versus lithium cathode, or having a lead acid in one application and a lithium ion in another, this is replacing the graphite anode across applications with a silicon anode, correct?
Yeah, and then compatible with liquid and solid. We could do with our material, you can still operate a solid state battery, 2C charging, and then you can get like decent cycle life. That's the solid state. And the liquid state, the thing is the biggest challenge we're solving, that's SEI related. That's the whole company works on. But yeah, I mean, in the future, the only way you can enhance the energy density of batteries is to go to just lithium ion batteries, to be specific, to go to either lithium metal or to go to high capacity cathodes. So high capacity cathodes are super expensive, right? Like, they're very, very expensive. 60% of the battery cost comes from the materials. And then lithium metal has its own issues. It'll be a great technology, but has time, like, 10 years down the line. If we can see all the vehicles running with lithium metal technology, we're very lucky. So silicon comes in the interim.
So that's a great question. Like, what is the timeline right now? Like that, answering this when question, when can we expect? Because you've been working on this technology in this translational research progress from the lab to commercialization. When can we expect to see the first silicon anode batteries out in the market? Is this a 5-year process, a 10-year process? What does that look like?
So it's already, SiOX is already silicon oxide, monoxide that's being used. Some of the companies in EV industry are already using in the small portions, right? Like they're only aiming for 3 to 5% of improvement in terms of electrode capacity. So those players are already using. So it's in the market, but it's not widely adopted, at 15% enhancement in the electrode, right? So with our goals are to give 5 to 10% improvement by next year. So 2023, by next year, we will have our material ready to go. And then 2023, we're planning to have it in a consumer electronics program. And then 2025, we want to be in an EV program. But this is going to be an additive product that's going to be added to graphite, and then over time, in the meantime, we're spending time on the complete graphite replacement. So the moment it gets ready, it goes in. But the solid state today, it's already a graphite replacement. You don't need graphite anymore to cycle stably using our product. So that's how we're meeting the market demand. Yeah.
And I'll wrap up here just asking a little bit about how this technology works for a lay audience. What is so special about silicon anodes as opposed to the traditional graphite anodes? What's that advantage? Where is that coming from a technical perspective? And what's your fabrication advantage understanding this process and having these patents?
Yeah. So the key advantage is the energy density. So you could drive your car longer, your cell phone can last longer, your drone can discharge faster if you want. It can be charged up faster. So fast charge is very important, and silicon can enable that. So that's the number one advantage.
Excellent. Well, that really addresses it. And I would encourage all the viewers here of Newchip Online Demo Week, if you want to get in contact with John at CleanFiber or Dr. Adireddy's team over at Advano, please take a moment right now to fill out our investor interest form, which you can find right below this video. I want to thank the panelists for their time in addressing this pressing global problem that we all collectively are facing, coming from the entrepreneurs, scientists, and the investors. Thank you so much for being with us today, and best of luck.